Maurice Blanchot remains a rather enigmatic figure. He's someone who had a big influence on post-war French theory, but his reticence to be in the public eye, his secrecy, has made him an enigmatic figure, but one I found very much worth exploring. He began as something of a right-wing nationalist before World War II, but it seems changed his ideals, possibly because of his friendship with the Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. Ultimately, Blanchot became very left-wing, but also something of a Zionist later in life, which I myself have no sympathy with, but illustrates maybe some of the dynamics that led to his change of heart. And I've been revisiting his work in the light of recent events, the war against Iran, the immense economic devastation it's likely to bring, maybe the beginning of the end of American dominance of the world. What will these things mean for the future? Suddenly everything feels very much up in the air. And this is something of what Blanchot was facing with the Second World War, with this apparent overturning of everything he'd known, this sudden questioning of what the future would be like, if there would be a future, and also what role he saw literature as playing in such turbulent times. And the earlier Blanchot almost seems to want to make literature a point of escape in the confusion of conflicting ideologies, which perhaps had left him burnt out in certain regards. Literature seemed to offer a different kind of subjectivity, a different way of thinking that was apparently an escape from these intolerable pressures around him. And yet, at the very same time, he could never forget that that's what he was trying to do with it. He could never forget that he was seeking to turn away from the conditions around him to seek this kind of escape. And what's more, in certain moves that sound very much like the terrain Jacques Derrida would go on to explore, he realised that in some ways literature betrays itself in trying to express reality in a deeper, perhaps truer way. Blanchot suggests that literature actually just ends up turning deeper into language, into something of the unreality of language. Perhaps a good example of this would be some of the modernist techniques of the stream of consciousness, the attempt to represent how people think in fragments and sudden, loose associations in a way that's supposedly more true to life of how we actually think. But of course, we have to ask: is that really how we think? In Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, or in James Joyce's Ulysses, do we really think in these kind of fragments of language? Do we have non-verbal ways of thinking, and so on? So, in some ways, for Blanchot, this attempt to get closer to reality actually just entrenches us deeper in a web of language from which we can't escape. And Blanchot is troubled by this. He kind of wants to retreat, and for much of his life he did. He was quite a solitary figure, and it was very hard to find his location and so on. And yet he's all too aware that he can't, that he will always be turned back to bigger problems of engaging with the world. And as we look at what's happening now, I can only ask what role my literary interests play amid these broader movements, because for whatever reason, I've gained a broad knowledge, rather eclectic, esoteric knowledge that many others don't particularly care about, that has no particular use now. Its cultural capital is severely depleted, as universities in the UK are in the throes of financial crisis anyway. It's the humanities that are usually the first to be chopped. They don't have the kind of cultural capital they had for the old bourgeoisie in this era of Elon Musk and entrepreneurs and so on. It really doesn't matter whether they know their Dickens or whether they know the opera and so on. And is my interest in these matters something of a shoring up of a personal identity, a way to give myself some kind of significance amidst these upheavals globally? And what role will that play in the decades to come? I don't think that, as some would like to see it, literature is some kind of spiritual resistance or something like that. I think we're at a very dangerous turning point in history. And as I've suggested before, maybe the best we can hope for is that literature will offer access to other modes of thought from other times, will make us conversant with how ideologies can be expressed, and make us ponder what ideologies are needed now, as much of what the West has taken for granted over the last 70 years or so increasingly looks like it's falling apart.